Brought to you by Mitabite.
Welcome to Inside Racing, and thank you for joining us. When Des Hoysted hung up the binoculars after calling a Fairfield harness meeting on June the 18th, 2001, he brought down the curtain on a magnificent career embracing 53 years. Des is a member of the famous Victorian racing family, and he called his first race at Wodonga on Boxing Day in 1948. Soon after that, he went to Melbourne to become understudy to Joe Brown on the ABC. In 1952, he landed the job of calling the Sydney races for 2GB, where he stayed until 1959, when he was at the centre of an amazing swap-over. Ken Howard was brought from 2UE to take Des's place at 2GB, and just a few weeks later, Des started calling the Sydney races on 2UE. And for the next 24 years, he gradually built his ratings and reigned supreme in the latter years as Sydney's most listened to racecaller. It's an absolute delight for me to welcome Des Hoysted to the set of Inside Racing as we pay him a most heartfelt tribute. Good to see you, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Jono. Nice to meet you again, mate.
Well, Desi, to say the Hoysted clan is prolific is an understatement. Uncles, cousins, as far as horse trainers go, abound.
Well, the original Wangaratta family had 12 members. A lot of them, of course, most of the boys went into racing in some form, and the girls, some of the girls married racing people. My father had 3 children, myself, Winifred, my sister, and Alan Andrew, my brother. I was the eldest of the 3. But from then on, of course, after the 12, the other members of the family weren't quite so prolific, and I think 4 might have been the best total of any of the other progenitors. But throughout those years, of course, they were the top racing family in Victoria. My dad rode for the father originally, and then for the second elder brother, that was HF Tib Hoysted in those days.
Now, there's a beautiful old photo of your dad, Wally, who was a very successful jockey in that part of Victoria for a number of years. And obviously you grew up watching your dad riding in races.
Well, we used to live right alongside the main stable, and so I got very interested, of course, in horses. My dad rode from that area around about Wangaratta and the northeast of Victoria. He rode a few winners in Melbourne. He got up as far as Wagga, and he won a few Albury Cups. So he was a pretty good rider in that particular era, in that class, I suppose you could say. He was never a star. But he had a couple of very bad falls. He rode until about the beginning of the Second World War, from around about 1904, when he was 12 when he started. He won the Wangaratta Cup when he was 13, but he had some very bad falls later on, and he gave it away around the start of the Second World War.
Now, you told me once about one of his falls at the Wangaratta races. You were there with your mum and your baby sister, and your father crashed with a couple of others before your very eyes.
Yeah, well, that was at Wangaratta, and I was 6, my sister was 4, and 3 horses came down right on the winning post. In those days, of course, John, there were no vests and no helmets, and they had these reinforced cardboard for skull caps. They didn't get smashed up all that badly, but it looked a terrible fall. And my mother, of course, was horribly upset at the time. And that's always stuck in my mind. And when I was calling races for all those 50-odd years, I used to always get a bit touchy and edgy when there was a fall, particularly if I thought it was a bad one. It stuck with me, and I can really see it now, you know, the horrible scramble of horses and jockeys all over the place. But as it turned out, it wasn't quite so bad.
Did you ever see yourself as a jockey?
No.
Never?
I rode a bit. I went to the track and I rode, but I was always going to be too heavy, and I was going too well at school. My dad never wanted me to be a jockey after what he'd been through. There was no money in those days, of course, in the bush and during the Depression era in the latter part of his career. And I was going pretty well at school, so my mum insisted that I stick to that, and I'm rather glad that I did, because I would never have made a jockey.
Des, let's look at the Hoysteds who succeeded as horse trainers. I think it's fair to say that the most celebrated is cousin Bob, a man of unique talent.
Yeah, well, he and his father, F.W. F.W. had Rising Fast, of course, and he was 15 times the leading trainer in Victoria. He started off with jumpers, which was rather ironic, but he went from Wangaratta to Melbourne in about the early 1930s. Bobby was a most successful trainer, of course. He was a great dedicator to his horses. He loved them. I mean, he was so close to Manicato that you would have thought he was married to him.
Yeah.
And it was the same with those other horses like Rose of Kingston and Rising Fast. Well, there we see him with Rose of Kingston after she'd won the Derby and was favoured for the Sydney Cup, and collected a motorbike on the way home from Rose Hill one morning.
Yeah.
And virtually, I think that put her out of business. She did win a couple of races thereafter, but she was never the same.
Now, Bonnie Hoysted was another well-known trainer who died much too early, much too soon.
Bonnie took over from his father, or learnt with his father, and then eventually took over from him. And he had a lot of very good horses. Don Astor, of course, won the Adelaide Cup for him. Manicato was obviously his best and his first Group 1 winner. But unfortunately for Bob, long after he won the Golden Slipper, he passed away, had a massive heart attack.
Yeah.
And Bobby got the horse. But Bonnie sent Bob to Adelaide to buy Manicato and told him he only had $3,000 to spend to go to, and he got him for $3,000. Bobby said he didn't like Manicato, but he only bought him because Bonnet asked him to, because he was an awful, angling, big thing, and he was no good, of course, as before they started to try him, and suddenly, when they went over to gallop him at Epsom, they found out he was a champion.
Yeah.
And he said to his wife, "I found my champion." This is before the Blue Diamonds.
Touching moment.
Yep. Yeah, all those years and waiting for a good horse.
Now, cousin Hal enjoyed a great deal of success. I think he was always Wangaratta based, wasn't he?
He was, yes. He went as far as Melbourne. He brought some horses up to Sydney and won races in Sydney, but Golden Doubles, I suppose, was probably his best horse. He won 2 William Reeds with him. And Ali Khan, he won some good races with him, but by and large, I mean, I think he won a Launceston Cup with a horse called Overproof. But by and large, he has been in that area that the early horses from, say, Wagga back to about Victoria and then down to as far as Melbourne.
Yep.
And he went out a couple of interstate trips, of course.
Yep. Now, there's Uncle Fred Hoysted got to train Rising Fast late in that horse's career. And I know you've always regarded Rising Fast as one of the best you ever saw.
I put him in my best 3 stayers, Rain, Lover, Galilee and Rising Fast. Father, as is well known, of course, so Bill Williamson put that tag on him. He got Rising Fast after Ivan Tucker was disqualified. Ivan Tucker won those big races with him in 1954. Father got him in 1955, won the Caulfield Cup with him, and then they ran second in the Melbourne Cup to Taparoa in that controversial Melbourne Cup where there wasn't a protest, but most people believe that had there been, he probably would have got the race.
Des, it's great to be reminiscing and looking back on your 53 years of race calling, but we've got to pause for an important break, and when we come back, we'll continue to reminisce with one of the all-time greats, Des Hoysted, who retired recently as a race caller after more than half a century. Back in a moment.
The Australian Feed Company is dedicated to equine nutrition. Farm managers and stud masters continue to put their trust in Breeder to provide all the essential nutrients for serving stallions and pregnant or lactating mares. Breeder also contains vital amino acids to support development of young growing horses. Mitavite is synonymous with quality and service in all equine disciplines.
Welcome back to Inside Racing, and my special guest is the one and only Des Hoysted. Des, your late mum, Dimpner, was a remarkable lady, and she did a lot of work for charity in her area of Victoria, for which she was suitably rewarded in later life. She was the recipient of the British Empire Medal. And we've got a lovely photo of your mum on the left there with the then Premier of Victoria, Dick Hamer.
Dick Hamer and Mrs Hamer, yes. My mum, of course, put a lot of time in, particularly after we left home. The three of us left home and got married and left home. And she spent years and years going around those old people's homes, playing the piano and putting on reviews and things like that. Mm. She was a very outgoing person, my mother, more so than my dad.
I think in the looks department you've certainly thrown to mum.
Yeah, I got the hoisted nose though, haven't I?
The old Lionel Rose?
Yeah.
A noble one at that.
Ah, beauty.
Now, Des, your first real kick came when you landed the job as Joe Brown's understudy on the ABC in Melbourne, and you got to work with one of the true gentlemen of Australian race broadcasting.
Yeah, that was about 6 months after I did my first call at Wodonga in '48. I knew Mel Morris, the sporting editor at the ABC, and he put me on as Joe's understudy. I did my first broadcast for the ABC in November of that year, and my first time relieving Joe Brown was when he went on holidays and Christmas. So I went from Wodonga to Caulfield in 12 months.
Was Joe the sort of bloke to impart his knowledge and take an interest in your development?
He was a lovely bloke, Joe. He really was. I think probably he wasn't so much of a racing bloke because he came from a hotel keeper's area in Devonport, Tasmania, I think it was, but he was a very, very nice bloke, and he gave me a great grounding, of course, as a race commentator, with that style that he had, you know, staccato sort of calling style.
Yeah.
Joe was a bit funny because he wouldn't use a microphone stand.
Never did?
Never did, no. Newfangled ideas.
I could never understand it.
Neither could I. But he called for until he was, he was very old, and before he retired. Yeah. And he called on public address for pretty well all of the time.
Tremendous effort. He could have made it so much easier for himself.
I would have thought so. I mean, Lockie Melville came down there one day and told him he was taking 10 years off his life if he didn't put on a microphone stand, but he never did. No. Newfangled ideas, Joe said.
Now, Des, I mentioned in the introduction the amazing chain of events that led to your leaving 2GB and going to 2UE in 1959. Now, Ken Howard at that stage must have been a formidable foe, intimidating.
Well, I came up here from the ABC in 1952. I was an understudy at that stage to Joe. When I came here, I mean, Ken Howard was supreme. He was Mr. Racing. There was no television, and radio was the whole segment of getting outside broadcasts of races to the general public. I could make no inroads whatever into his audience, no matter how hard I tried, and they did pretty well. 2GB promoted me okay, but I had no chance. And when my second term of 3 years came up, and his second term of 3 years came up at 2UE, he was with Cliff Carey. Cliff had come to 2GB in the meantime, and he was with me. But he obviously wanted Ken because Ken was going to get the ratings. So they promoted Ken on 2UE and took him across and gave him a contract there and left me out. I didn't get a renewal. So I had to do something, so I eventually went round to 2UE and told
Pretty lonely feeling at the time.
It was indeed, because I was in Sydney with a house and a wife and a child and nothing to go to. So anyway, I eventually landed the job at 2UE and was there for 24 years.
And didn't you have the last laugh with the most enviable ratings for the last few years?
Yes, well, over there, I think 2GB and they gave me a bit of assistance there. 2UE gave me a free hand to virtually do what I wanted. As long as I didn't slander anyone. Yeah. I was able to roast or criticise and so forth and be pretty open about things. And then gradually I also improved my calling style, made it more commercial, and I got the ratings, and 2GB were very, very lax in what they did, and eventually 2UE got over the top of them.
And no mean order. You shared the airwaves with other great callers during those golden years of radio, but there was one for whom you've always had tremendous admiration. The late Bill Collins. I
worked with Bill Collins for a number of years, for about 20 years all up, from when I went to 2UE. And in my mind, he was the best race caller we've ever had. I mean, he had his bad days. As you know, Bill was a mad punter, and a very big punter at that. And his punting used to sometimes dictate his work. But when he was on song, I've never ever heard a person who could call a race better, describe what was happening, anticipate so well, and also he had a perfect voice for race calling. So he was, to my mind, the best. The most accurate I ever heard was Lockie Melville, the ABC, and he was my role model, John. When I was listening to him in Victoria before I ever started, I loved his style, very ABC style, so that's why when I learnt that way, I didn't go well as a commercial caller for a long time.
Yep. Well, let's listen to the Des Hoysted style as it was in the mid-1970s. There has never been a tougher assignment for a race caller in this country than the running of the 76 Melbourne Cup, when Flemington was hit by a freak storm about an hour before the running of the Melbourne Cup. The jockeys' mothers wouldn't have recognised them, but Des Hoysted made a tough assignment look pretty easy.
They're covered in mud now. It looks like Van der Hum making a run out wide as they enter the straight, and then 2 or 3 lengths further back came clear. It's pretty well impossible to pick up the horses in the middle of the field, but Happy Union leads past the 250, only just in front from Reckless and Summer Hay, and coming hard down the outside is Van der Hum and Golden Black going with him. The 2 favourites are going to battle out the cup. Van der Hum and Golden Black have run to the front at the 200. Van der Hum about a neck in front of Golden Black with Reckless and Happy Union behind them. It's Van der Hum coming away from Golden Black in the closing stages, and Van der Hum goes on and wins the Melbourne Cup by a length and a half to Golden Black. Kythera's run third, and neck away fourth is...
Yeah, the horse named after a popular liqueur, Van der Hum, and ridden by Bobby Skelton. Well, Des was virtually a non-punter throughout his long broadcasting career, so emotion rarely, if ever, crept into his race calls. But there was one notable exception. The 1982 AJC Derby, won by Rose of Kingston, trained by Cousin Bob.
Now, and the leader is on the outside, Our Planet just in front, but Rose of Kingston pounced immediately. Rose of Kingston takes the lead over the rise, about a length or so now to Our Planet, a length and a half further back, Rare Form, followed by Mr. Digby. Gurner's Lane is running on, but Rose of Kingston's got the Derby won. She's making history. Go, Rosie, go! She's got it won. Rose of Kingston, a length and a quarter. Our Planet is second, Gurner's Lane third. Fourth is Mr. Digby, followed at the head of the others by...
2 perfect race calls from Des Hoysted. You know, the horse you admired most of all was one you never got to call, the great Burnborough. You stood outside Joe Brown's broadcast box in 1947 and saw this horse do the near impossible to win the Newmarket.
That was Burnborough. In the 1947 Newmarket, he had 9 stone 13. He was opposed to a field of 27 runners. And he was, of course, a hot favourite. But he never really appeared in the call. In fact, I can remember old Jim Carroll saying, I cannot find the favourite. And suddenly Burnborough, who was about 3 off the rail, came to the outside into the centre of the track, and he just gobbled up a top field of sprinters. You would hardly imagine a horse could have gone so quickly. He was not 100 to 1 chance with about 200 to go, and he was all over the winner, 100 to go. Here he comes to the centre of the track now, and with Burnborough just throwing the Mully just throwing the reins at him, really, he picks up this wonderful field of sprinters, and on the line he was taking hold of him to win by about a neck. It was one of the most courageous and brilliant performances you could imagine, and he did it so easily.
He was a cheeky jockey, Des, wasn't he?
He always rode him that way, and he rode him that way in the Caulfield Cup, of course, and got buried and never got in the race.
And a magnificent-looking thoroughbred specimen he was too. In the 1950s, you fell in love with a beautiful bay horse called Karaoke. He raced until he was 7. He won about 20 all up. One of his great performances, though, was to win the Metropolitan of 1953 with the equivalent of 60.5 kilos. Lovely photo of him there from your personal collection.
Yes, that's right. Well, Uncle Duck gave me that. Well, now, of course, here he comes here in the Metropolitan. He had run 3rd in the Epsom on the previous Saturday after jumping a fallen horse, and Duck wanted to scratch him, but he wasn't allowed to. And he draws level with Hydrogen, who was another champion horse, and he just gets the better of Hydrogen over the last 50 metres and wins by about a long head, I think was the margin. You'll notice as he comes back to scale there, John, he's just about out on his feet.
Yeah, much like Octagonal after winning his derby here.
He's never the same after.
You're on record as saying that Tulloch was the best horse you ever actually called.
Yep.
Now, you didn't call this particular race, the Caulfield Cup of 57, but I bet you wish you had.
Well, I wish I had too, because it was a performance of a world beater. I don't think any horse in the world would have got near Tulloch this day. He had weight for age, and he beat an absolute top field, and he toyed with them. Ran right away over the last 100 metres and ran record time at that stage. Neville Selwood on board.
He was invincible on the day, wasn't he?
He was an outstanding horse, and of course he must have been to have come back after that bad illness that he had. I think that points the fact that probably he's been the best horse we've had in the last, 50-odd years. I think he was better than Kingston Town.
It's hard to argue with that. OK, time for us to take another break, and we're going to break with an assortment of photographs from the Des Hoysted photo album.
The stars of Australian country music come out for one big night at the Tamworth CMAA Awards. Casey Chambers, Gina Jeffries, Melinda Schneider, Lee Kernaghan, Keith Urban and more provide a night of entertainment you won't forget. This is an exclusive music country event which includes previously untelecast performances. The CMAA Awards, in August, only on Music Country.
Don't miss the Darwin Cup, Australia's biggest racing party. It's not just racing, it's a ball and a host of social functions. So for the wildest race meeting in the country, get to Darwin on the 6th of August. If not, see it on Sky.
Welcome back to Inside Racing, chatting with Des Hoysted about the great sprinters he called during his long career. You've always had a big rap on Vane.
The best sprinter I ever saw, along with Manicato, but I would have thought possibly he's better than Manicato for his performances. Here he is winning the Golden Slipper, and remember Special Girl?
Oh, yeah.
It's supposed to be a match between he and Special Special Girl never got in the race. That was a magnificent performance by Vane. Then he went to Melbourne, of course, and he won that Craven A Stakes by 12 lengths and under handicap conditions. Yeah. He was a freak, and unfortunately broke down early.
You know, most racing commentators of your era regard Darby Munro, George Moore as the best jockeys they saw. You've always leaned slightly to Billy Cook in your appraisal of jockeys.
Yes, I liked Billy Cook's record and I liked his style. He had a lovely style, so he looked a part of the horse. You know, you see him on horses and he didn't look as though he was there as a separate entity. And he had a marvellous judgment of pace. He won 2 Melbourne Cups, of course. I always felt, however, John, that had Peter Cook been able to stay in racing for as long as his father, that he would have been at least the equal of him. I thought he was a marvellous jockey, but he just didn't have the temperament, and things went wrong and his career blew up and he was out much, much earlier than he should have been. But I always felt his style was reminiscent of his father. And you see some of the judgment that he displayed in some races. In the Melbourne Cup he won on Black Knight. That was an outstanding ride. A beautiful ride, beautiful judgment. And just a dash also.
Yep. Now, Des, 1983 was the year in which you were forced to relinquish your metropolitan race calling duties. TUE at that time had a policy that personnel were to be retired at age 60. So you had to give it away. You went out kicking and thrashing, which is
I wasn't happy about it.
And your final day was a Warwick Farm meeting. I can remember doing a little piece on your retirement for Channel 9 News, and here is the footage from the archives, and we'll see a lovely pan up to the broadcasting box here in a moment, and there you are getting ready to call your final race with Ray Hadley standing on your right.
Yes, and the mustachioed Ray Hadley.
An emotion-charged day, Des, and a pretty tough day for you to get through.
Yeah, and I still managed it okay, but I think perhaps there wasn't quite as much build-up to my retirement as there had been to Ken's. That was a very traumatic day, and when the day you retired must have been draining on you also, and Ray Conroy. So I sort of didn't want any fuss when I finished, because I didn't think I could cop it, because I can't watch a sad movie. the end of a sad movie. I'm a very sentimental sort of person, and I thought I'll go through this day and I'll do it the same as any other day, and when I walk off, that's it. But I wasn't happy about retiring because I thought that the compulsory retirement at 60 was a bit unfair. I was going pretty well at the time.
Your achievements are many in the business, but is there a regret? Something you didn't do that you would like to have done, or something you'd like another shot at?
Well, I don't think I ever was greatly enamoured with calling overseas, so I didn't miss that. I think had TUE carried me on for another, say, period of a couple of years, I would have been happy. I think that's the only thing I missed, because I felt that at the time they retired me, I was still going as well as I had been 5 years earlier. My ratings were still as good. Ironically, the first survey that came out after my retirement was due a month later, and we were top rated over KY, which, you know, made it a little bit, I thought, was lopsided and unfair. But no, other than that, no, I had a good career, John. I've made a lot of friends. I've been to a lot of places. I've seen a lot of things I would not otherwise have seen, and I've achieved a lot of things I would not otherwise have achieved. So really, I've got no regrets at leaving the public service and going into racing.
Des, thank you very much. We're out of time, as always. I've enjoyed our chat. I want to thank you for all the little favours you did for me over a long period of years. You were the first bloke to come and wish me good luck the day I did my audition race call in December of 1964, and I've never forgotten it.
I remember that was at Canterbury, was it?
It certainly was. I was terrified.
When we had the old broadcast boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've done so well, John. I congratulate you on what's been a marvellous career for you. And I hope that our association and friendship lasts many more years.
I'm sure it will, Des. Thanks for joining us on Inside Racing. Congratulations on a magnificent career.
Thanks, mate.
The one and only Des Hoysted, and it was an absolute delight to have him on the program. We look forward to your company again next time around when we introduce another famous racing face. Until then, many winners.
John Tapp's Inside Racing, brought to you by Mitabite.
Sunline with a mighty lead though. She's 4 in front. Tyler Knott gets the second from Scott.
Stately bird of brilliant. And Hugh Shaker make it down the outside with an explosive burst.